It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Just a quick reminder that we now also have a dedicated Afrikaans rugby channel called Raakvat Rugby. The link to this channel is in the description down below and also in the pinned comment. Please make sure to subscribe to both our channels, Raakvat Rugby and Megaphone Rugby, if you haven't done so already. And just to double check that you actually are subscribed. We've noticed that people say that they thought they were subscribed, but they never were. So just double check on that. And thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to the Lekker Rugby Pod. Azari, time for episode 46. The Lekker Rugby Pod. I'm in the Drakensberg, so if my surroundings are a little bit unfamiliar, don't get a fright. I can see you're a little worried there. I haven't been kidnapped, though it looks like it. So welcome back. I'm looking forward to this one.
How's it, MVS? So how's the Drakensberg? There's a lot of myths and legends in that area. You know, any kind of climbing going on, clouds, mysteries unfolding.
You know me better than that. If I can avoid any climbing, I'll avoid it like the plague.
You by the pool with a beer.
Yeah, well, not even the pool, just the beer. Plenty of them as well. Now, I wanted to ask you, I was talking about the beer. I was having a beer this weekend, just relaxing, watching the Bulls, we'll talk about that just now. And then Toulouse and Bordeaux, just blew me away. And I'm suddenly, if I was Russia, I wouldn't, again, I said it before, that I wouldn't sleep a wink. I wouldn't close an eyelid. I'm just so worried. Are the French teams really that good? 80 points against Leicester of all teams, with Andre Pollard in there as well. It's not like they were second tier or anything. What on earth happened there?
Yeah, some really amazing results, shockers, and also turnarounds. You have teams like Sale getting hammered and then turning around and doing their thing. You certainly have had some teams that had reversals. Toulon was rolling for a while. They took a step back. But, as I've kind of pointed out in the Harry Index all season, is Leinster, Toulouse, and Bordeaux sort of stand alone in the sense that they are fully stocked with layers, with depth, but also 15 internationals starting, 4 or 5 internationals on the bench, a fair amount of cohesion. So you take Toulouse, and it's basically the French spine minus Aldrit, Penaud, Bielberry, and Antonio. And so the question is just, how much better is Willis than Aldrit, or vice versa? Is Penaud a big miss, or is Kinghorn, sort of a Penaud light? Is Bielberry that much of a difference from, Capiozzo? And so you get into these debates where you wonder, is Toulouse a quarterfinal World Cup team? Would they have been better against the Boks in the quarterfinal, or is it still, the advantages come from, a little bit extra, different level of assistant coaching, the fact that playing for your country gives you an extra arm and a leg sometimes, but then that's weighted against cohesion. We have some clues about whether Bordeaux, Toulouse, and Leinster are really better than their corresponding national teams. But all of them are extrapolations, right? Take the British and Irish Lions, which is the surest comparator. And you have people even now posting things sort of ignorant, but we're in an ahistorical period of history maybe, where they just say, well, it's a scratch team, got to pull together, so surely it's not as good as Ireland. We have demonstrable proof, empirical proof. We're not talking about anecdata. We're talking about proper. The Lions are always better. By definition, they play in South Africa, in New Zealand, and in Australia. They're always better. They win 3 times out of 4 in Australia. There's no home nation that has that good a record in Australia. England would be closest at 60%. They win about 35% of the time in South Africa. No home nation has that good a record in South Africa. Even Ireland is celebrating because they had their first 2 wins in history in the last decade. In New Zealand, it's 17% of the time the Lions win, and no one wins it on New Zealand. There's been 1 series victory of all those guys. So we know that accumulating a proper spine team, the British and Irish Lions tend to be Ireland plus some, Wales plus some, depending on who's strong at the moment. So you have the advantage of a Toulouse team, which is basically the French team, and then you hand pick your problems. You go, okay, so I need Chocobaris because I actually think he might be a little bit better than, what I've got at 13. And I've got Kinghorn for length of punt because I want Ramos, Dupont, and everyone to be booting the ball forever. Maybe you want to play to the ball with Jack Willis, and maybe he's a bit of a different option. So you can actually hand pick it. That's a pretty dangerous combination if you can stay healthy. Okay, so soft tissue injuries can mess up any plan of any team. And that gets into the strength and conditioning. That's where usually national teams do have a little bit better fitness guy that usually have just a bit better setup. And they have the advantage as well when you're in test rugby of longer analytics where you're watching teams and players and you can scoop a guy like Bundy Aki who plays for a low-performing team, but you know if you're Andy Farrell that you put him into the Irish team, he plays better. So it's an art to it. You know, you can pick a Franz Steyn playing for any team losing, and you know what he'll do with the box. But we do have the rise of the super team. Toulon was the first one to pioneer this of just buying talent, the Habanas, the Bakis Bueta, you know, just loading Drew Mitchell kind of Galacticos. But I think it's different now. I think it's different now because these are perennial teams where a country, the Irish model is to take one province, not only because more people live in Dublin than they do in Cork, in Galway, and Ulster, but also because that's just where the schools that feed the rugby come from, and they load it. I think it's over 10 of those players have nationally subsidized contracts. So Leinster's got the money in store to buy the Archia to get the Jody Barrett. And by the way, if you go out and get Snyman and Barrett, you're getting, I mean, this is one of the best All Blacks of his generation, one of the best Springbok up-and-comers. It's not like just grabbing Capiozzo and a guy like Jack Willis, who aren't proven at the highest level. Archie Snyman is a World Cup difference-making winner in the final 20. Jody Barrett has, you know, faced match-winning kicks over and over in his career, and he cleans like a lock. So you look at these three teams and you say, what does it all mean? Are we watching what happens when the Irish model comes to fruition? And then in France, it's a whole different kettle of fish. They're not loading it all up in Toulouse. They have 50 pro clubs. The French system is light years ahead of everyone else in terms of the TV deal. Their TV deal right now with 3 divisions of rugby, everyone else is struggling to have one league. They have the best TV deals, the only ones that rival other top sports. The one coming in 2027 is even better. It's so good that every single top 14 team is going to have a bonus, funny money, 10 million euros. Every team. Bayonne will have it, who just qualified from Pro D2. So you think about a small town like Castres, which is very tiny, and you put 10 million euros into that town above and beyond everything they've got already, they will inflate the wages. They will come get the 7-foot-tall guy from Bloemfontein who's 18 years old. So you have that, which I'll call the infrastructure. French don't play sports in schools, by the way. They don't go play at school after school. They actually go to clubs. But those clubs are catching youth earlier and harvesting Pacific Island talent. Argentina, pretty much all of Argentina now is playing in France. So you have that. You have a different system professionally as well, where if you're out for any time at all, the national system kicks in on wages up to 7,000 euros a month per player. A lot of these teams who have 10 injured players, one of their biggest sources of line item income is the compensation from the government. Plus, they have image rights. Remember, Franz Steyn, Johan Goossen both had this issue where separate standing corporations sit alongside, adjacent these top 14 clubs, and they have 50% of image rights. Player does 50% of his rights. So, you know, really handsome, funny guys that have become popular. Michalak was a guy. He's on every poster in France, kind of a model. I mean, he's making $1 million on the side besides rugby. So they can get these guys like Owen Farrell, who have notoriety. So it's difficult to imagine that Glasgow or the Bulls or any of these guys, you know, someone monster can really go toe-to-toe with these monster clubs in both competitions. What they're left with is a Hobbesian choice that Jake White often talks about and decries and moans about, but fair play, it's a true thing, is they kind of have to pick their poison. And then you get into the difficulty of what if you pick your poison and you bomb out of the Challenge Cup as well. So that's what we're facing. We're looking down the barrel, guys, of, you know, boxing clever, that you wind up in the Challenge Cup and who do you draw in the first round? Oof, I got Bayonne. Who would you have drawn if you were cast and you beat cast and you took your proper players and won that game? Oh, it turns out that cast is paired up with first round Benetton. Bulls could beat Benetton.
Well, I wanted to ask you about Bayonne. Who the hell are Bayonne? I mean, we know nothing
Bayonne's a
about
proper club. Yeah.
They're number 9 or
No,
10 on your index, aren't they?
They're right there. And so if they play in Bayonne, which is where they're playing, you would favor Bayonne. I've got Bulls slotted at 9. So the way the Harry Index works is always if all available players are there, you're doing your best team. So the reason why the Bulls haven't slipped from, say, a loss is when they don't play their proper team. I don't necessarily downgrade. That's a strategic, tactical choice. So Bayonne is 9 wins and 4 losses in the top 14, which is, by now we realize the top 14 is the strongest, toughest league going in the world. Not just from the money, not just from the talent, but actual head-to-head. When there's comparators and benchmarking, we realize 5 or 6 of them may be in the top 10 compared to 2 or 3 from ERC, maybe 2 from Prem, I should say, and maybe the Blues or someone out there, but the top 14 is proper. So to have only 4 losses at this point in time in the top 14, Bayonne, it's proper. They just got into the top 14. They were promoted from Pro D2 in 2022. They've been before, but I mean, I'm saying that they're on the rise. And so there's only 2 teams in the top 14 that have fewer losses than Bayonne right now, and it's Bordeaux and Toulouse. So put that into the framework of how good Bayonne is right now in their league. And then you ask me, so who is Bayonne? Who's playing there? There's some names, but it's not the big time names. They were all signed in the Pro D2 that you have at Bayonne and Bordeaux, but it's a reflection of how deep the top 14 is. Just think about what Bayonne's got and waiting for Jake and his game plan. You have number 13, Cirelli Makala, who's a proper stud. He creates and scores tries. Next to him is Manu Tuolagi at 12. I mean, England designed their rugby around him under Eddie Jones for a decade. He's one of the most dominant carriers in the top 14 in all European rugby, 54% dominant carries. He's still a hard guy to put down. In the loose, the biggest carrier, the heaviest carrier for Bayonne is a South African guy. You remember him, Uzar Kasim? Kasim was a favorite of, I think Hanneke Meyer picked him. And I think he also got some play with Alistair. And he's 145 carries into contact this season. So he's the guy that Hanekom and Lowe got to keep track of, Marcel Coutier. At number 9, the French are stacked at 9. It's Maxime Machinot. He's a 38, 39 cap French scrum off. He's a pest at the breakdown. You got Camille Lopez, who's a canny operator at 10, also a French capped fly-off. His backup is Segons, who's also a French capped guy. At hooker, they got Facundo Bosch, who is a Argentine stud. He hits and cleans. He's got 8 steals at the breakdown, which compares with a guy like Hanekom. So they do play to the floor. Mateo Carreras, another Argentine, really good wing, as we know from Rugby Championship. He's got an 83% gain line stat. So they get the ball wide, and then he's difficult to put down. Lucy Bruni, also from the championship. He's a big hit guy, 21 caps for Argentina. And then there's one of the most fascinating guys for Bayonne is a German Kiwi Samoan named Giovanni Habel-Kufner. So he plays for Samoa. I think his mom or dad is German, and the other parent is Kiwi. And he's a monster at the ruck. So you have this kind of advantage for Bayonne of not being on anyone's radar in Pretoria. But you have, when you actually look at the team and you see what they're doing it a different way than Bordeaux and Toulouse. They're a proper team. None of their guys get called away too much. I guess, there'll be some people that are called up for Six Nations, but not too many. And then, the Argentines tend to stick and they don't play till the Rugby Championship. So, there's less disturbance. I think it's a proper battle. And the good news for the Bulls is if they do win against Bayonne, they've got a nice pathway to run into guys like, Bath or someone else. But that first opening round in Bayonne, which is Basque country, tough as nails. It's the toughest guys in France. If you're going to run around, you don't want to be in a street fight, don't do one in the southwest. If you're going to be in a street fight in France, go up north, go to Nice, go to Lille, but don't get in a scrap in Bayonne.
You know what? I can't tell you how many WhatsApps and phone calls I had and said, why are the Bulls now suddenly in the Challenge Cup? How does that work? I thought it was only going to be for next year. Can we still qualify? Just explain to us very briefly the idiot's guide to the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup, because there's a lot of confusion going on, because a lot of people thought, the Bulls are out, they're going to be in the Challenge Cup next year. No, they're in Challenge Cup this year still. They're still playing in the Challenge Cup. They can still win the Challenge Cup. Just explain how that works. And you and I have been, we're WhatsApping, like maniacs this weekend about whether Jake planned this or just happened to be like this, or just, we'll get to that just now. But explain to me what on earth the Bulls and the Sharks, for that matter, are suddenly doing in the Challenge Cup, and why the Stormers are going to be surfing for the next couple of weeks. And that's a direct hint there.
No, we don't deserve to be in any kind of cup right now. We don't. We're playing goof troop rugby. Okay, so as a sport in general, we change. We're the most insecure. Also, we're almost like, as a sport, we're almost like the kind of person doing plastic surgery every 6 months. We want to keep changing our nose and our chin and our bum, and so rugby is always changing. It's really a problem for us, by the way, because every study I've seen and shown in top sports is you have to have some continuity in your competitions. So one of the reasons why the Six Nations is tremendously successful and was as Five Nations and Four Nations before that is because it's a simple thing. Whatever is in the competition, you play each other one time. It's home this year, then it's away, then it's home, it's away. You can look at statistics from 2020, 2015, 2023, and it's nice because there's an ability to compare apples to apples. But in the club competitions of Europe, there's always been this idea of the super competition, and then we mess around with how to make it exciting. Do you want to have 16 teams get into knockouts or 8? Do you want to have a consolation bracket? So the challenge, basically is that plate. At your local tennis club or golf club, you're used to this because if you don't make the first cut, you go into the consolation bracket, and then you can still win something. But, at the end, at the golf club on Saturday night, you're a little embarrassed. You're a bit sheepish and bashful when you go up and get the plate, because the real one's coming. It's still money-making, though, because, the minute you can get into the Challenge Cup and you are, let's say, a team like Edinburgh, it's pretty cool because you're going to fill up Murrayfield. You're not good enough for the Champions Cup, so it's a win-win. On your coaching staff, it represents, in the performance clause debate with your board, improvement. Look, I did get into Europe. I am playing Challenge Cup, and this is comparative. It's a more tricky one now for the Bulls. So how the Bulls slid into the Challenge Cup this time is what they did is they had the 16 format 4-pool qualification for the Champions Cup, the big boys table. And then what they did is said automatically, if you fit in right under that, there's going to be 14 slide over down into Challenge Cup. The Challenge Cup has all their pools, and they have their stats. And so if you compare it right now on the Challenge Cup website, you said Bayonne versus Bulls, it would be 0 for Bulls because there's no Challenge Cup competitions, and then you'd have 1,800 yards, meters, whatever. And so you'd have to sort of realize that you slid in. And the theory there is for a team like Bath that's sitting on top of the Prem, the Bulls, which is probably, second in the URC, it's kind of weird to cut them out just because of the vagaries of the draw and because, one-loss teams are in the Champions Cup final 16, and I'm not sure if a 2-loss isn't, but I mean, there is some trickery there depending on which pool of death you are in and which pool of life. So it's that whole let's share the money, let's keep things going, let's have as many participants as possible. Probably that's not a bad idea. The difficulty is the confusion and lack of clarity of jeopardy. You want to know in competitions as you're watching what my guy has to do, what my team has to do, what they have to do. Otherwise, it's a little bit of I struggled over the weekend. I was trying to depict it in different cartoon ways and mountains and prairies and fish. I don't know what I do. It's difficult to build drama when you can say, "Oh, cruel loss there." Oh, but we're in the Challenge Cup. So that's where we find us. As far as whether Jake sat down on his performance clause, having got to the home final of the IRC and been top 8 of the Champions Cup, and that he would have asserted to his board, judge me and rank me on whether I can not make even the final 16 of the Champions Cup, and then I will or will not make the final. There's no way. They would have said, we want at least what we did last year with the same players, a little more experience. Elrich Lowe's better now. Cameron Honeycomb's not 21 anymore. So they would have said, no, we want you to be at least. And sustainability is also important. Like if you come exactly at the same level, you lose to Leinster in an IRC final, and you get into the Champions Cup and you win first round, and then you run into Bordeaux, it's fine. I mean, no one's thinking it's the end of the world. I think you do start to wonder if you slip a rank down. So what this has done is it's made it really important to do well in the IRC. I mean, really, I think for a coach to look at the board straight in the face, and look at himself in the mirror, he has to do really well in the IRC. I think you could look at the Stormers and Sharks season as a much more deserved middle of the road, mid-table. And I think for the Stormers, obviously, they also look now at the IRC and say, you know, we have not a bad run left. We've had terrible injuries. What can we do? You know, and I don't think he's in any danger, Dobbo. I think with Jake, you know, the way he's positioned this is we're all about hardware. We're a club that wins things, and that's fair. But he's made a rod for his own back now because he's got to win a game in Bayonne.
Yeah. I don't know, man. You know, I said to you, maybe this is just an idea of, you know, buying a bit of time here because, you know, like you said, the pressure, the talks with the board and everything else, winning something is going to be something is better than winning. Or yeah, to me, like I said to you in our conversations this weekend, yes, the Bulls ended in the top 8 last year and they lost against Northampton. Remember when they sent that D team or C team, whatever? Nobody remembers that. We remember the URC final. And I tell you right now, everybody remembers the Sharks won the Challenge Cup, no matter how much or how little it means. I know you're talking about the fact that Champions Cup is like the cream of the crop and the best teams in the world. Yes, it's absolutely true. But the point is, look at the crowd that pitched on Saturday, or even against Northampton. You know, the champions, the Premier League champions, the Premiership champions. Nobody pitched up because nobody knows who they are, and they're not even sure what competition they're playing this weekend. They don't know how it works, how it fits in. But you pitch up there with a trophy, and you do a little, you know, victory lap around Pretoria streets with the Challenge Cup. I mean, everyone's going to be, oh yeah, that looks very good. Isn't that just a simple way of saying, listen, take a bit of the pressure off. We're going to win this. Whether they do or not, it's a different story. We saw Willem Strauss said this weekend, yeah, we're probably going to be playing Scarlets. And they ended up playing, going to go to Bayonne, like you just explained. Different kettle of fish. That's a bit dangerous. But isn't that just a way of buying a bit of breathing space and then, you know, going full out for the URC now?
Well, that's how he will play it. That's how they will say it. And that's what the marketing department will gather around. The Sharks did a branding around, you know, champions and used that all year. I think discerning fans see through that a bit. It's not bad. It's not bad to have a Challenge Cup. But branding it that way on the front end before you beat Bayonne is difficult because then what if you don't? And then you're still staring down the barrel of going, what if I have a key injury in the IRC? What if I lose something, you know, like the Northampton game in the IRC, and you realize, whoa, nothing is guaranteed. Nothing in life is guaranteed. And one thing about championships is getting to a final. Guys talk about it in every sport, just getting into the final group of the British Open in golf, getting into the final day of Wimbledon and playing in a final, playing in the finals in the FA Cup, and then you lose. If you fall short and you think in your sort of happy brain, optimistic brain, we're back next year. What if you're not? What if there's injuries? What if someone moves on? What if some of your best players are leaving? Because it's professional sports and people are free agents, they can move. It's one of those things where I think my doctrine would be always try to win every time. And you do that, yes, you platoon and you have to have rotation of players, and we need sabbaticals. But you can drop 5 people in or 2 people in into a team that's medium range or even younger, and it makes a huge difference depending on your intelligence on how you use that. So an example would be Bath came out roaring against Leinster. They scored some of the best tries I've seen against a Nina Arbor defense at test or club. And they were in that. They were winning at halftime. But then you get a guy like Archie Sneeman come on. You have Slamani at scrums. You have the added punch of a Geordie Barrett who can move across the back line. And so can you go 80 minutes with a champ? So I think it's difficult that the Bulls have they have some players that are hard to put down. I never thought of a 21-year-old, 22-year-old guy not wanting to have game time and minutes. He's like the young Etzebeth, give me more, give me more. He didn't want to ever sit down and was fine. So I think you got to know your players and say, on the Stormers, like, why do I have Galant and Lebok and Dixon sitting in the crowd in Paris watching what if there was just 10 minutes of each of those guys in a very, very winnable game? So I think we have to box clever, and you look across it, and a team like Toulon or Glasgow doesn't have infinite resources. They're not really that much resourced than the Bulls. So what are they doing? How are they platooning guys? I think Rossi has the gold standard with monitoring load, thinking about nutrition, and he has guys really monitoring his guys to know when they need a bit of push. And some of your guys are heavy minutes players, so they're not all the same. Like a guy like Elrich Lowe, you look at him, he just looks like a war horse. Like, it's almost like he gets better every game if he plays longer. And you have other people that play in spurts, like a Sneeman, who, I don't know if anyone's got a better 15 minutes than Archie Sneeman. Like, he could just come on at 15 minutes and change the whole game. But is he good at 80? I don't know. So you have different styles here. And I think the challenge is to begin each season and probably map out a storyboard of what you want to achieve and be very clear about it and build expectations the right way. Otherwise, it always looks like you're being a bit cheeky in the end to go, oh, well, no, that's great because now we're in the Challenge Cup. And no, I'm not overhyping Bayonne. They're not better than the Bulls, but the Bulls are not better than Bayonne. I think they're pretty much 1A and 1B. and it probably comes down to home field. I mean, in the end, I think French teams are really not that good away from home most of the time. They really underperform. But at home, it's unbelievable the experience of some of these grounds. And I think that's what a lot of the young players come away and some of the presentations that they have in different streaming services about the Champions Cup, they interview the players. So take a guy like Ivan Ruiz and they say, what do you love about the Champions Cup? What grounds have you gone to that you really find to be amazing? And it's interesting to actually hear them talk about the travels, the aspect of going to a small town in the foothills of the Alps in France, and how people talk a lot about going to play in Nelspruit or at Loftus, and it's scary. It's a bit intimidating because it's so far from home, or like in Bloemfontein. It's similar actually in some of these French towns. I mean, you're far from home. It's not Paris. It's not cosmopolitan. These guys live and breathe. They're beating a drum since 8 a.m. They're getting drunk at noon. They rock up to the game at 4, and they're really like sauced. They got, a trumpet. It is proper home support. It's not for the faint of heart. I also think that it's almost like going to play in New Zealand sometimes in the South Island. It just seems darker there, like they don't have proper floodlights. And there's French sides where the stadiums are not super modern. It's sometimes some of those stadiums are built in 1972. They haven't had any upgrades. And when you're playing out there in Bayonne, I mean, you'll see what I mean. I've gone to the stadium there. It's an interesting town, and I think South Africans actually would like it. It's actually a kind of a cool place, but they are just like South Africans in the sense that they live, breathe, eat, walk, talk rugby, and so yeah, it's tough. I think champion European rugby is a whole different breed. Some teams like Munster, they know that they may or may not win in the league, and they did snatch one, the York. But overall, they actually put more stock in these Cup competitions. They've done very well. They've overperformed in those. It's a bit like in soccer in England, where they have the FA Cup and then they have the league. There's only a few teams that can really win the Premiership League of football in England. You have to have this massive depth, but anyone can go on a run in the FA Cup. You just got to win 3 or 4 matches and suddenly you're in glory land. Similar in these European competitions where you get on a run, you have big time game players, Peter O'Mahony, Ty Byrne, Jack Crowley. They can rise to the occasion. So nobody is counting out Munster. And I have to say that the best match I've seen in this year, it's a young year, was Munster against the Saints at Franklin Gardens. Absolute spellbinder, loved all of it. Incredibly physical. Crowd was into it. Great visiting cohort from Munster, and just never knew what was going to happen next.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier that John Dobson's probably going to be okay. Now, we talked about Jake having the conversation with the board, and I think he should be okay. And I think actually the Bulls are pretty well placed, and I think a lot of the hype is overblown. The Bulls are actually not that bad. I mean, this past weekend, I think they did quite well, my opinion. But I don't think the Stormers are that. If I was John Dobson, I wouldn't be that comfortable. I mean, not even qualifying for the Challenge Cup, which means you came last in your pool. That's what it comes down to. I mean, and they dropped out completely. The Sharks, if all that spring was, yes, they've got a lot of injuries, Belinda, I know, and everything else. The point is, they're not there. I mean, they should have done much better. So those two coaches, what conversations would they be having with their board? I wouldn't be too happy if I was Marco Mazzotti or Johan de Root, for that matter.
I don't think Plumtree's in as comfortable a position as Dobson. It's okay. First, there's 3 things to think about there. It's not that long ago where Stormers were in final winning and then final losing. That does give you a little bit of a shelf life. We're not like, what have you done for me this year only? It's also, it's like in most of our roles in business, probably a 3-year moving average if you're in sales. Probably have a 3-year moving average if you're a CEO. If you're any kind of financial services guy, you're talking to your clients about what you're doing over 3 years. You're not going to just focus on first quarter only. So I think Dobson's got a good story to tell. He's also a very likable fella. And he hasn't burned any bridges or acted truculent or pugnacious to anyone. He actually befriends journalists. He's someone who takes a great interest in his players' lives in general. I think Plumtree is more a guy, almost a relic at the Sharks, where if they could find an option, they would go and do. I think Massotti and his group are very visionary that way. They want a global brand. And Plumtree's not like Dobson. He doesn't have the star power of Jake White. So I think he's a bit of an odd man out. Sharks have underperformed. Yes, the Challenge Cup was a good consolation, but you would say they've underperformed over a 3-year period. You wouldn't say that about the Stormers over a 3-year period. You would say now, what's happening now? What's happened this season? And then you shouldn't never talk about excuses like injuries at press conferences that much, or talk about it to your players, because you're almost making players feel bad that they're second rate. But in a board discussion, absolutely, you talk about workers' compensation, time missed, injury, soft tissue. You do, because those are rates you can compare. They are manageable, they're controllable, and then they're not. Someone breaks a leg in a perfectly legal tackle. That's just, Franco Mostert against Irish. There's nothing to do. It's just bad luck. And some teams have extraordinarily bad luck. The Stormers have had that this season. So I think that's okay, as long as you can explain how I go forward. And also you probably have to do it in the right way and not get mad about it. Like, you have to say, that's true. I did underperform. Here's my plan. I'm going to hire this assistant coach to bring in this particular skill pattern. We got to do better at lineouts. Here's why. I know why we lost. I know why we went down. And also, we can have an injury discussion inside the sanctity of a boardroom where we're all on the same team. We're talking about it. We go, yeah, but it's not excuse making. I think Jake White's in a different position because he got to the final and it was a home final. He lost to Glasgow. And then I think he has to show improvement year on year, not necessarily right now, but there has to not be a fear by the board of the Bulls that if we hang on, that next year will go down from this year, and this year was already down from last year. That's the problem. is, if it's a gentle slide. Typically in Jake White's career, he's done really well at the first part of the cycle. He's a bit like Michael Cheika in that sense. He's a tough guy. He always does better. But there's also some problems sometimes in man management. And so I think the Bulls probably looking at a longer term there, and they're probably looking at, what will our player group look like in 2026, and what's the plan there. But as you say, right now, if you had to pick a team to be, you'd say the Bulls. I mean, they're the only one in the competition on Europe, and they have 2 games in hand and should finish near the top of the ERC unless they fall off a cliff. But the South African teams are just fighting a losing battle in some of these issues, right? I mean, it's one of your first questions was, should Rassie be losing sleep? No, because look where the lion's share of the top box that are fully experienced, they're playing in Japan. Damien Delende, Jesse Creel, Jasper Visa, Peter Steph Toy, Faf de Klerk, Kwagga Smith. We just could go on and on, right? That's a whole swath. If you had to if you made France lose their equivalents of all those players and they were playing in Japan right now, they're not doing anything in the Champions Cup. So it's different. It's apples to oranges. It's the decision's going to be around how we see the model. So the Irish model is keep players at home. Nobody plays for Ireland unless they play one of the 4 provinces. The provinces are micromanaged. They could even decide who you start. So Snyman cannot start because we want to artificially prop up Joe McCarthy's minutes. But if they were just picking who would start, you pick Snyman. He's a cult hero already. He changes games. But they cannot get what they want. A guy like Robbie Henshaw, who's a Galway man, has to move to Dublin, and it's geared towards having a super team. To the chagrin of Mac Hansen and the guys in Munster who hate it. But that's how they play it. It's centralized to an extreme, and that's that. France is just, we're going to have the most money by multiples of 8. Everyone's going to play here. We'll look better than we really are in club because we do rely on the foreign element. We're going to underperform at test, right? Because A, we don't care as much. B, we don't win, so we want to sulk about it. And C, we're not even going to take our best players down to New Zealand. The model of New Zealand is to be hyper protectionist and say we just have this sort of God-given stream of incredible high-quality talent. We're not as big as everyone else's, but you don't get picked for the All Blacks unless you're here as well. And we're gonna stay insular, almost like pure, like an old school. South Africa is all about schools, and our hidden advantage is that we produce in schools rugby the envy of the world in terms of raw talent. And then we've decided to embrace the diaspora. So whether it's Franco Smith or Jacques Nienaber gathering IP abroad, Johan van Graan, and then bringing it back. Also players doing the same thing. We're like the Venetian traders of the old times where we had like an empire that's global trading, but it's not centered in one place. You don't like fixate on it. I don't know what's going to win. It strikes me that modernity and money usually swamps everything else, especially if it's filthy like it is in France. So, unless the French juggernaut can be stopped in terms of these increasing advantages in money, we're looking at a sport which is only 30 years old in professional terms, probably going the way of cricket, probably going the way of football, where we have marquee events like World Cups, nation championships. But for the most part, clubs will end up winning. If clubs can make $400,000 difference in your income as a family, who's going to turn that down consistently? Fraser McWright's talking about how he stays in Australia at the cost of $400,000 a year. In a career that's 10, 12-year long career. Like, you're making your money during this decade. That's it. You want to give up $4 million? No. Archie says no. I'm going to secure the future of my family. I'm a mercenary. Who cares? I'm a mercenary. And he's having a good time. So I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if it's possible. I just think we have to embrace the craziness of each model and see which one wins. And, as long as you have a super charisma coach like Rassie, it kind of works. Post Rassie, don't know.
You know what worries me? You mentioned the South African schools being a strong point. We saw Grey and I think Montpellier tie up now. I see Start Francais and Monument. My school is now sort of signed an agreement. So they're starting to raid our schools
Yeah,
now. That's not a good thing, is it?
terrible actually. And it's probably the bulwark that needs to be established. In my mind, there's still 100, 150 world-class athletes not being noticed in South Africa from townships, from suburbs, from schools that aren't fashionable, from schools that don't have rugby programs. So I would say for Gayton and the Ministry of Sport and everyone who's in the muckety mucks of rugby is get rugby as a mandatory coercive sport. I can make you play rugby in school, right? It's once you get to be 13, 14 years old, difficult. But if you're 10 years old, you're playing barefoot rugby, 8 years old, you're going to fall in love. You have people that look like you that you can now as a model, Chesson Colby is your hero, Sia Khaleesi is your hero. More of that's happening. And it could be from different regions, some regions, not just like Eastern Province where there's a hotbed or Western Cape where there's a hotbed. I'm talking about regions when people haven't been into rugby. If that can be accomplished, which takes investment and putting rugby in schools, and talent identification results, where it's not just the same 20 schools generating the box by and large, that is an advantage over France, which doesn't have any sport in their schools. It's an advantage over Ireland, which doesn't produce that level of athlete on Olympic terms, on speed terms, on size terms. And it swamps New Zealand in the end just because of population differences. And so I think that's where the South African model can dominate, where they take sort of the American approach of talent identification when you're 10, 12, combines, special coaching, getting slotted in early. It also means that you can never shrink. You can never cut clubs. You got to add clubs. You got to add more content, more games, more competitions all the time. You probably outgrow the television production providing content in South Africa. You have to get a little bit higher than that, bigger than that, and you need to see more. And a guy has to realize at 16, I could be a superstar here. And yes, maybe I go to Japan, maybe I go to somewhere else, but the content itself has to be comparative. And I think what I'm saying is not news to anyone. I think people know that, but this is the time because it's the advantage right now being double World Cup champions, extremely popular players, an extremely charismatic, divisive, polarizing, cool coach. Everything is in order, and you have now the idea of money. You have proper offers coming in, competition. This is the time to do it. And if we get money in, the most important thing with that money is to ram it into schools early, young kids falling in love with rugby and having enough scouts, enough people who know how to spot talent that's unpolished and say, that's a guy, that's my future MP. Let's sign him up.
You came up with quite a novel suggestion, on my way on WhatsApp. I almost, what the hell are you talking about? And I had to think about it, and I still don't like it. I understand it, but I don't like it. I'll get to that solution just now. But to get to that, we need to understand how Ireland works. And you mentioned earlier that it's centrally controlled and it's quite rigid, and they can determine lots of things, starting teams and who plays where and the likes. And Leinster is sort of the favorite child. Just explain that to me quickly or briefly, and then I'll get back to your suggestion so people just get a bit of the context here.
So Ireland was, the lovable loser that has some peaks, some valleys, but never rise, to the level they have. Where they are now is very recent in time. It's the greatest sports team in Irish sport history of any sport ever is the rugby team now. And they haven't even won the World Cup. They haven't even got past the quarters. So, they were Six Nations competitor doing pretty well. There were moments, but they were not usually the meat of the British and Irish Lions. They were usually the tail end of that. And so now they reached number one ranking a few times. They sat at number one for at least a year. It's a proper team. The reason why they got there is because way back in time, David Nucifora, a guy from Australia, was brought over, and IRFU, which is this nameless, shapeless organization that never fights, never has any stolen money, has no scandals. You don't even know who runs it, but they're really, really maniacally clinical about building. They said, let's have a plan. Let's centralize everything. most of the private schools that St. Michael's and Blackrock that furnish the best players in Ireland are in a cluster in the Dublin area, around Wicklow, around South Dublin, and they are the meat. So they said, let's have an academy approach. Stuart Lancaster was brought over to help lead that. Leo Cullum stays in place at Leinster, and continuity is important. And I said, bring us your best players from the West, and we'll make them better. That's the Robbie Henshaw approach. Or once we get in place, let's have someone guide the salary levels and who plays where, and we control the foreign, non-Irish qualified influx. We never make it too much like in France, which hurts the French in the end, actually. In Ireland, they do know how good they are because they're not flooding themselves with foreigners. It's just enough here, just enough there. But even if we bring in a name on, he cannot start above a guy like Joe McCarthy. So they've managed it from that standpoint. And then they lift the burden of the contract itself away from Leinster if you're one of the 10, 11, 12 nationally contracted guys. They don't just take on a small percentage of it. It's pretty much the whole thing. So that, you don't have to pay Ty Furlong's salary, Leinster. Ireland does. And then you're placed in Leinster. I think there's 10 of those that are in Leinster. No one else has more than 2. So Tyburn, and I'm not even sure Peter Armani had that for a long time. So Munster doesn't have a lot of those centrally contracted. Connacht had Aki and no one in Ulster. So all the money in the attempt is there. So that model is what Australia is currently trying to do. Centralize it, squeeze out anyone else who won't take the deal, make the deal with the devil, the National Union, and then the Waratahs is what they want. The Sydney team, they want that in the big city where it's easier to recruit people to live. Young people want to live in Sydney, not Canberra, and then they try to make that the super team. So that's the Irish model. It's not workable in a place like South Africa where you have equal cities that will not bow to another city, where they all think they're the best, and where the rivalries go back to 1903. So you're not going to tell, hey, Pretoria, I want you to bend a knee to Cape Town, and no one in Cape Town is going to acknowledge that they're inferior. So it only works in a country where there's a clearly dominant metropolitan area where everything happens there, and where the lion's share of everything, all industry, marketing, and all that predominates. Munster is going to seethe at that prescription, but also they're going to recognize the truth of what I'm saying, which is it's loaded against them. Like, the way Jack Crowley's being treated, for example, right now is weird. And so there's a hidden hand behind the scenes guiding things and saying, what's good for Leinster is good for Ireland.
So what you're saying is, and I know it's not your suggestion, it was just sort of something to talk about, is what about a South African super team drawing all the biggest of the best players, salaries being paid by SA Rugby, and the other teams, whoever gets left over, obviously they're going to choose the Bulls because they're the best team, to be the super team, and then draw in Sasha and whoever else. And the rest will just sort of compete but get whipped. And that's part of what he talked about. You said the provincialism, I said to you, the provincialism is just too strong. Pretoria or Cape Town, for that matter, or Durban, will never, ever, ever allow anything like that to happen. But leave all of that out of it. Let's say it's workable in that sense. Will it work? I mean, it's like basically them choosing a local Springbok team. It doesn't sound too bad. I mean, maybe we should just have one team in the Champions Cup, for argument's sake.
It's only if you want that. So if you want to have Champions Cup glory and shut Toulouse up with all this yapping, we can do it. I mean, it's not that difficult to say we have a super team and it's so good that other people want to come from other places, and you bring in a Bowden Barrett near the end of his career and Cody Taylor to be your hooker. I mean, if you have basically a Bok team and you have all the best and they're fully loaded in Cape Town, and you say, hey, Bowden Barrett, hey, Will Jordan, want to play in Cape Town for a couple of years? I mean, that's doable. But at what price? So South Africa has chosen Test rugby, a little more like the Irish model, but not the Irish model in the sense that There is no predominant one place where everyone can just agree. Our parochialism, our insides would rebel against that. There's no way the Oblo Bulls are going to let
Never.
Cape Town be their master.
Never.
We're going to
Over
have
my dead body.
we're going to have a problem, a big situation. But that is so academically, you could say you'd have to build a super team the likes of Toulouse. So what is Toulouse? What is Leinster? So you just say, in any walk of life, who's winning? Who's the best? How do I copy them? So if to copy Leinster and copy Toulouse, there is a way to do that. And it involves picking a place that's going to be extraordinarily more blessed with the talent and have the lion's share. So it's impossible with our backdrop, our background, our history. And by the way, it's kind of impossible in Ireland, and they're seeding it. And it's probably the demise that will happen in the end is it'll be too long, too much. Don't want to do it anymore. It's not fair, Matt Hansen was the harbinger, the canary in the coal mine when he was bitching about it wrongfully. But he was touching on a true point, which is this isn't fair. And this isn't fair is a potent, powerful political force in human history. If people start thinking that, we've been screwed. But so I think we have to think of South African teams as underdogs always inside the Champions Cup and enjoy that. Relish the idea that Stormers won the Irk because it's against all the odds. It's cool that the Bulls got to the final, should have won, but it was sort of like a miracle almost because Leinster should win that every single year going away. It is a travesty for Leinster ever to lose the Irk if you look at the salaries, but not just salaries, but what is taken away from them by their national union and given to them. I give you Ryan and McCarthy and Furlong and Van der Fleer and Doris for free. It's amazing. And also, tell other teams, no, I'm sorry, that loss too good. We're going to move them to Leinster. So, I think we look at it that way and enjoy that. Don't get too, irate about it. It's okay. We don't ever want to think that clubs rugby is better than Test rugby. For us, it's sacred, Test rugby, and always should be. And when you go down too far down the road of super teams to win club competitions, you end up downgrading Test rugby, which is where the French are now. And Irish are not, but the French definitely, I see it all the time. When we have any debate online with French, they just keep saying we like club rugby better. And, Toulouse would beat the Box. They just want to argue like that. That's their thing, and it's useless. Not going to happen.
You just mentioned how many talented players South Africa has. Now, this new equity deal is coming soon. Now we're going to go a little bit back in time here, but if that deal comes through, what's preventing SA Rugby from taking a lot of players? We call it the pony contracts now, where they subsidize the players, as far as I understand. Why don't they just take, for argument's sake, Ruan Orkia or Sasha or whatever, and put him on the SA Rugby payroll and then give him to whatever province he's for free. Anyway, I mean, isn't that the way to go forward? When the money comes in, you mentioned now when the money comes in, pumping into schools and the likes, but isn't it a good idea to then take away, because we have budget caps and pool squad sizes and everything that we have to contend with, and lots of injuries in 12-month seasons and the likes. Isn't it a good idea to select a couple of players like you just mentioned, 10 or 15 or so, give them to SA Rugby to pay them lock, stock and barrel, every single thing gets paid for, and then they belong to SA Rugby, and SA Rugby can say, for argument's sake, the Bulls have got a problem at 10, let's parachute Sasha in there, and the Stormers have a problem at whatever position, let's put XYZ in there. But it's still the strongest teams possible, and that gives us 4 bites the cherry. Wouldn't that work?
Yeah, it's a modified New Zealand system, and New Zealand has got the money in from their sugar daddies, and they have deepened that. So it's the enforced sabbatical. They have player loading. You're not going to play your best Hurricanes team or your Blues team every week. The model also fits South Africa because there is no giant. It's not like Auckland gets the better deal from Wellington, gets the better deal from Christchurch. They have real rivalries. Chiefs hate the Hurricanes. Hurricanes hate the Chiefs. They'd prefer, if they lost in a competition, for the Chiefs not to win over an Australian team. They would root for the Australian team over their hated rivals. So it's much more like Stormers Bulls, where for me to want the Bulls to do well is difficult. I get a hemorrhage in it. That's good. That's a sign of a healthy club, provincial, city versus city. I mean, in the end, when they come together the Box, then we're fine. But while it's club, you don't want people to root for the Crusaders just because they're from New Zealand. I mean, the Blues and the Crusaders, it's just like oil and water. They're never going to be okay with each other. That's good. That's healthy because then you have proper derbies. You know, when Crusaders come to play anyone in New Zealand, everyone in New Zealand wants them to lose. It's just the way it is, like with Leinster. So there is a model there, and it's probably doable. I think we do it informally already with Japan. There's a lot of deals with Japanese clubs, understandings that now it's obvious that we want to put people there in a way of having them monitored, loaded, controlled. Steve Hansen's, Robbie Deans, these guys are really good at combining with the BOK coaches and sharing information and put them on the proper workouts. You can see the advantage of it. It's managed that way. Getting away from this Curry Cup load, forever season, Curry Cup, ERC, Champions Cup, never a break. You get like Franz Malherbe just needs, at this stage of his career, he needs a 2 or 3 month nothingness. They just do. You come back and you're hungry for the game again. So, yeah, there is a way to do that. And the only way to do that is to assume control of contract terms and to fund it, like you said. I mean, when I pay for something, then I get to talk more. I get to tell you what to do. And, that's just life. I think that's where it's headed. And I think that's a good use of the money when it comes in. The other one, like I said, is you've got to push to more school, a pitch, a rugby field in every school, a rugby program in every school. That should be the mission.
But just to finish off, if you were the coach of the 4 South African teams, the Stormers, the Sharks, the Lions, and the Bulls, what would each of those teams, would you think, what would make their season in any competition a success, starting with the Lions?
Lions need to go as far as they can in the ERC, and they have a nice channel. They have a nice channel in Challenge, actually. I think for them, it's about performing punching above their weight. They have the smallest talent pool, the smallest contract base, the fewest box. So they're already fine. They're doing well. I think finish strong and don't have a whimper. Just keep going at this rate. It's already a successful season. It'll stay a successful season.
So USC top 8, probably.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and maybe do a little better than that. They can make some noise. They can make some noise. They've have really good set pieces. They play proper rugby. They've avoided the goof troop style of Stormers. They don't over offload. They play proper rugby, so they're good.
Talking about the goof troop, your Stormers.
Stormers got to make some noise at the end here in the ERC. It's pull off some upsets, make life difficult, help the integrity of the competition, but also themselves sneak in somewhere. There's a good run there that's possible. You look at it, you actually say, could they beat? Should they beat? It's not terrible, and other teams will have more division of forces and resources because they are involved in the Cup championships, and you also have some people coming back, who are healthy. So Stormers in every match they ever play should never count themselves out. They're an elite team with elite players. It's a matter of getting them all together at the same time and believe like an exit's a good thing. It's okay. You can just kick the ball out. It's proper. Like Toulouse does it,
Yeah, sure. Kick it out properly. And then when you get the
Yeah,
line out,
kick it
win
out.
the line out. Yeah.
Yeah, like Rugby was talking about the slow motion lineup we have where we go, and now we are throwing the ball. And like opposition teams have 3 players having to bite it. It gets so slow. It's like a little toss up.
Yeah. And then the Sharks?
I think Sharks need fundamental revision of game style and coaching group, and they've been that way for a while, but they just, with that roster, and the level of talent they have, they should be doing better. So I think it's probably it's finishing strong like the Lions, but maybe a little more pressure on them to do a bit better. And so, like everyone's going to harm each other. So in the end, there's no hero. So this is why the super team for Leinster makes sense in Ireland, right? You just pick a team that should do really well in the competition, and then everyone's kind of happy in Leinster. But the Sharks have the kind of roster that when you look at it just on paper, you go, "Oh, that's not bad."
Well, even this weekend, I mean, it wasn't the first team, but it was still a good team. to get
Yeah.
whipped 66 points and Damien Pinot scoring 6 tries. I mean, what on earth? I don't want to go there. All right, the Bulls. We
Point
talked
for
about
fun.
Jake, maybe being under a bit of pressure, but not really. All the South African teams basically have home derbies. That's what they're going to be doing until the middle of March, kind of thing, except for this Cardiff and Leinster. Poor Storm is going to Leinster next, but shame. The Bulls have a nice run now and lots of racing time with the Six Nations and the likes. Honestly, what would the Bulls be satisfied if you said they don't want to be back, but they are now going to be lower than last year? So what would be a good result, do you think?
Not necessarily, right? So they're well placed in the ERC. So getting to a final puts them the same as last year. So you didn't take a step back. Win or lose, if you win, then you get better. If you lose, same. You win. Get to the final of the ERC, plus you win the Challenge Cup, you're the same-ish. You didn't lose ground. At least you have something to show. If you flip it around, you win the ERC and you bomb out of the Challenge. That's better even still, because that is a hard to win trophy. You are the best team in the ERC for the whole year. That would be better. I actually think that Jake does need to do that because of a coach of his pedigree and caliber, and because of the pack. I mean, Lowe, Steenekamp, Wessels, Nortia, Coetzee, Lowe, Hanekom, Van Staden. Come on, that's a pack that bullies people. And then you have speed out back, you have quality all over the pitch. You just have this one issue, which is, how do I want to play my game? How do I want to attack the red zone? And what do I do with this incredible defender beating quantity of ball? And that's coaching. You can't just say, well, I need to have Pollard. If I had Pollard, then I win. I mean, this is not realistic. This is saying that you're not a good coach then. So I think Jake is a good coach. He's one of the best coaches that ever came through South Africa. So he should figure it out and punch his way to a final and get there and win.
I want to be a bit presumptuous and say that maybe the Bulls took a bit of your advice too hard, because we saw some tap and goes, we saw some aircraft carriers, less mauling. Clearly something hit home, or maybe not, maybe you, let's not.
I'm sure it's not me, but maybe it's a weight of people saying that are authoritative, and I think we were not wrong. We were all right in the sense that it was too predictable in the red zone. Instead of speeding up our attack as Bulls, we were slowing down, and this is terrible. It's like decelerating in a golf swing. You can never decel. So once you get into the red zone, you got to speed up. And the great moments of Bulls season so far in the red zone have been where momentum was rolling and every ruck was shorter than the previous one. And then, you have compelling ball carriers. You're going to win those. And that's what Toulouse does. It's just people running in support, accumulation, momentum, and then at some point people fall off tackles. It's not that difficult. But for some reason, the Bulls were thinking too much. They were going too quickly to the cross kick. They were giving up on momentum, and they were not playing ferociously enough on the clean. Referees they'll let you clean illegally once you're in the red zone and you do it, en masse. Everyone's doing it together. So Leinster does all the time. Leinster's illegal at every clean. So it's hard to be a referee and ref that out of the game. So.
Funny when you talk about something like you and Andre, when you mention something to me, then you suddenly see it, like the 2 pass, then do a kick pass. No, it's funny. You never noticed it before, and now you suddenly see it. They gave 2 passes, so the kick pass is going to work. Oh no, the kick pass from the first pass is not going to work. Interesting, man.
Yeah, because your wing on support is always stationary. It's best positioned right at the beginning. It's where you have made inroads in the wind field that suddenly the wing comes in too far. The fullback's out of position, and suddenly that cross kick is wide open. You saw it all the time this weekend of people working it until the cross kick was inevitable. I mean, acres of space. Yeah.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.